Hello, this video is going to show you how to create photorealistic backdrops for use with your model railroad. Now, creating backdrops is advantageous in as much as it allows you to create a very realistic backdrop with little or no artistic ability. In addition, you can capture the actual look and feel of the area where your railroad is operating by using photographs from that area. Computer does all the work for you, so artistic talent is not really required. So let's get started. First, let's discuss what you'll need to create photo backdrops for your model railroad. First, you'll need a computer. It doesn't have to be anything really fancy, but a reasonably recent computer. Dual core is preferred but not required. You'll need software. Software can be open source free software, it can be commercial software, it can even be sometimes the software that came with your camera. And also there's the option of using trial versions of the major software packages, which you can use for free for anything from 14 to 30 days. Next, you'll need a camera. Obviously a digital camera is preferred, but if you have a film camera, when you have your film process, you can request a CD-ROM, which will have the digital equivalent of your photos on it, or you can even have your photographs, which are already printed, scanned into digital format. If you don't want to use a camera even, you can use online textures is what they're called. They're actually photographs of various objects found in the real world. And one of the websites you can use to obtain these textures is called CG Textures, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's the stuff you need to collect, and let's take a moment here to talk about how you might collect it. One of the things you'll need is a computer. Most people today have a computer or have access to one, and in most cases the computer that you have will be adequate to doing a photo backdrop. But if you don't have a computer, remember, you may be able to get a hold of one at school. You may be able to use the computer in the library. And if your computer that you do have is not up to the task, again, school, library, work computers, with your boss's permission, of course, can be used instead. Software. You're going to need image manipulation software. And the most famous image manipulation software, of course, is Photoshop, but Photoshop is a very expensive program, so let's talk about alternatives. There is an open source. Open source means basically it's a piece of software put together by volunteers, and they make it readily available to anyone who wants to use it. The open source software I use frequently is called GIMP, G-I-M-P. And GIMP is a image manipulation program much like Photoshop, although it doesn't have the same user interface as Photoshop, nor does it have the very steep learning curve that Photoshop does. And it can do most of the things that Photoshop can do, although it's a little bit cruder. GIMP is a program that manipulates digital images like the ones that come from your camera. Another type of software that's handy to have is called a vector drawing program. And vector drawing programs are programs like Adobe Illustrator, Corel Draw. There is a freeware vector drawing program that's very handy, and it's called Inkscape. Now, you won't be using vector drawing programs very frequently, but it's good to have on hand. And since Inkscape is free, just like GIMP is, you can afford to use it and have it on hand even if it's not used very frequently. What do you do if you want to use commercial software to help you build your photo backdrop? Well, the standard by which all photo editing software is measured is, of course, Adobe Photoshop. But I'm going to offer that Adobe Photoshop is too expensive, has too high a learning curve, and really just overkill for this particular project. If you have Adobe Photoshop and you want to use it, by all means go ahead. If you're adept at it and you're comfortable with it, by all means go ahead. But you're not going to use anywhere near the capability that the the software has. We're going to be doing some very simple tasks like merging photos together, making basic adjustments, cropping it, and then resizing. And a lot of the capabilities of Photoshop will be wasted. However, you may want to look into, as an alternative, you may want to look into Photoshop Elements, which is a somewhat stripped down version of Adobe Photoshop. It's cheaper, its interface is much more intuitive to use, and it's overall almost a perfect tool for the job that we have. You can typically find Photoshop Elements in the current version for about $60 if you haunt the online retailers, but you can also get a previous version, probably 2 or 3 versions back, if you search around, for as little as $30. In fact, before recording this, I looked online and Amazon had Photoshop Elements 6, which is the version I have, for $30, as opposed to the $70 or $80 that the current version costs. And oh, by the way, I got my version of Photoshop Elements 6 as a bonus when I bought a printer, was right in the box, didn't even know it was there, and it's been a tremendous boon. If you don't want to use one of the Adobe products, then there are a whole bewildering array of products from Corel for photo editing, and they seem to have a product for every niche. One that I have is Corel Photo Pro, and it can do everything that we need to do as well. And I got this copy because I was on a registered Corel user, and they were switching from to a new version, and I got this one for, I think, $10 with free shipping from Corel, which is another tip. If you are a registered user of Adobe, Corel, any of the big graphic software, make sure you scan their emails, because sometimes they have fantastic deals in there. While we're talking about commercial software, let's not overlook the software that came with your camera. If your camera has a scene mode, a panoramic mode, a stitch mode, a Photomerge mode, whatever they care to call it, you probably receive software with the camera that will help you stitch those photos together. And since that's the main task that we have to do to create a photo backdrop, it's probably acceptable. In fact, when I started this, I used the software that came with my camera to stitch the photographs together. You also may have received software. That software package may also be able to do some simple photo manipulation, cropping, and potentially even adjusting color, brightness, contrast, and the rest. If it does, then you probably have an all-in-one package which can do everything. It may not do everything as well as some of the other commercial packages, but it can do everything, and you should consider using it at least as you begin to try out these techniques. About a minute ago, we talked about obtaining software inexpensively, either by using older versions or through a manufacturer's closeout, and potentially even free if it came along with another piece of equipment that you bought, like your camera or your printer. There's one more way to get commercial software inexpensively, in fact free, and that's to use trial versions. Almost every major manufacturer of graphic software makes a trial version available for a 14 to 30-day trial, and you just download it and use it. And in fact, you can use oftentimes their very, very top-end package for nothing this way. And if you get all your work lined up so that you have it all set and ready to go, and you put aside the time, you can get an awful lot of work accomplished within 2 to 4 week window that you're given with the trial software. So this is something you should consider when you're ready to move from a simple software package, like potentially the one that came with your camera, to a more sophisticated package. You can try before you buy. Last but not least, you'll need a camera. You don't need the latest high-resolution, ultra-zoom digital camera. In fact, a good point-and-shoot camera in the 5 to 8 or so megapixel range will do just as well, because we do want the backdrop to be a little bit soft after enlargement. But by the same token, neither will your cell phone camera suffice. You need a camera with a good glass lens so that you have some decent resolution in the picture. You don't need a wide-angle zoom, because in fact wide angle will give you a bad perspective for stitching together pictures. What you do want, however, if you can at all swing it, is you want a camera with a scene mode, with a panoramic mode. That will make stitching together multiple photographs a lot easier. I use Canon cameras, and they have some on-screen aids that allow you to line up shot after shot after shot for the stitch mode, the panoramic mode. If you want to use your film camera, you can go ahead and do that. When you have your film processed, make sure you request a CD-ROM with the pictures on the CD-ROM, so the film processor will digitize the pictures for you and put them down on a CD-ROM, and you can use them from there. Now, the only drawback to this approach is the resolution put on those CD-ROMs is not particularly high, but again, that should be okay because we're not looking for the greatest amount of resolution possible. Although not absolutely necessary, a tripod is a very handy thing to have. You can take adequate pictures without the tripod, but again, the tripod will help you not only in holding the camera steady, but in aligning and making sure that your pivot point as you move from shot to shot to shot is consistent. So consider a tripod as part of your equipment. Finally, if you already have printed pictures that you want to use as your photo backdrop, but of course they're not the full backdrop size, you can have those pictures scanned at Staples. I think Walmart can do it, photo stores can do it, and then they can turn those into digital files that you can manipulate. Or if they're already to your liking, you can have them printed out directly from the scanned files. One other way you can get backdrop pictures is to use what are called textures. Textures are basically just photographs that are used by, say, graphic artists, interior designers, and game builders to create rooms and even real worlds. They're basically photographs of things that you can find in the real world. And the place that I have gotten textures from is a website called CG Textures, which has a free membership where you can download 15 megabytes a day, which is plenty for what we have to do. And I'm going to show an example of how to use CG Textures in just a moment, so keep the idea of using textures in the back of your mind for just one more quick segment, and then we'll get back to them. Now that you have all your stuff together, there are 5 steps you have to do to get to a photo backdrop. First is you have to either take photos, get photos scanned, or use a texture that you get online for your source material. Step 2 is you have to stitch the photographs together into a backdrop that is of a sufficient size to be worthwhile printing. Third, once you have that big photograph, that panoramic photograph, you need to compose the photograph, adjust color, brightness, contrast, potentially remove out of scale elements, and add back in elements which weren't in the original photograph. After you've done all that, the next step is to resize the photograph to the physical size that you want it to print out as your backdrop. And then finally, you need to print the photograph. So those are the 5 steps, and rather than go into a long dissertation on how to do it, we're going to jump right into an example right now. In this example, we're going to download 4 textures from CG Textures and then use Adobe Photoshop Elements to stitch those together, manipulate it, and get it ready for printout. Now, you can follow along with this example by going to Adobe, signing up for an account with Adobe, and then you will have access to a free trial of Photoshop Elements. And the other thing you'll have to do is go to cgtextures.com and sign up for a free account there. Then once you have those 2 things in place, you can follow along and do everything that I'm doing on screen. As a matter of fact, I suspect in 2 hours from a cold start, you could get to the end of this demonstration and have your first photo backdrop. We're on the home page of cgtextures.com. I've already logged into my account, or actually Google Chrome keeps me logged in every time I return. And this page shows just a small sampling of all the different textures that they have. Textures are pictures that are little snippets of things that you can use in creating photographs or building video games or what have you. what you have to do is go to cgtextures.com, sign up for one of their free accounts. Their free account allows you to download 15 megabytes of textures every day, and that's a lot of pictures for all but their very, very largest files. So there's really no need to sign up for one of their pay accounts. That's only for people who are actually using these things in the course of their business. And by the way, I've never received any unwarranted emails from CG Textures. In fact, in over 2 years of using CG Textures, they haven't contacted me at all. So once you're logged in and you're ready to go, we're going to go get a few textures here and stitch them together into our first example of a photographic backdrop. And to do that, we're going to go on the left-hand side here. They have the listings of all the textures that they have categorized by type. We're going to go to Skies Partial. Once we're on Skies Partial, we're going to go to the second page because the texture we're looking for is on the second page as of the recording of this video. Now that can move, but what I will do is I will put the link to this texture on the video when I edit it. Here's the texture we're looking for. You can see here this is part of a set. A set means that they have many different photographs that can be used together in this set of pictures. So we click on that. It takes us to the page where the pictures are. Now, as you can see, we can scroll down and they have many different sets of skies, all of them with a little bit of overlap. As you can see right here, these two clouds will overlap when they're put together. The textures we're going to grab right now are these first four at the top of the page. And to grab a texture, once you're logged in, all you have to do is click on the size that you want. Now, even in the largest size here, these are only 0.6 of a megabyte. So you can see that if you have a 15 megabyte daily download, you can download a lot of stuff off of CG Textures. So I'm going to download first the first one. And you can see it showing up here in my Google Chrome bar. Second one, and it shows up here. Third one, and finally the fourth one. So now we have the four textures that we're looking for. They're all in our download folder, and now we can close out from CG Textures and continue on to open up the application that we're going to use to stitch these photographs together and manipulate them, and so we'll take it from there. I have Photoshop Elements version 6 open here on my desk. This is the application I'm going to use to continue this demonstration. So I just, opened it up on my desktop. Now in my download folder here, I have the 4 files which we downloaded from CG Textures. Notice this is 1 large, 2 large, 3 large, 4 large. So I'm going to load these. I could highlight them all like this, but I'm going to load them one at a time into my Photoshop Elements 6. So there goes 1, and it shows up on the screen. Here comes 2, and it shows up in Photoshop Elements screen, and load 3, and now it's on screen, and then load 4. And we're done with our download folder. So now I have the 4 pictures loaded into the application, into Photoshop Elements 6. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the first one, hold down the Shift key and select the second one. You may not be able to see it on the video, but a little blue outline comes up around each one. So now all 4 of those pictures are selected, and they're going to be what we work on. Now I go to the File menu, click that, click New, and then in the menu that flies out, I want to go down to the last option, which is Photomerge Panorama. And oh, by the way, you have to be in full editing mode. See where the cursor is here, full editing mode, to get this panoramic mode. So now I'm going to click Interactive Layout, and then I'm going to click Add Open Files, because these files are all open and they've been selected. So all I have to do is click Add Open Files, and those 4 files have been added to as the source files that Photoshop Elements will use to do the photo merge. So now all I have to do is hit OK. This is going to take a few seconds, but what you see here is that Photoshop has created a picture which will hold the other four, and over here it's working through like a good robot to fit the pictures together. In fact, it just did that faster than I can explain it. What's displayed on the screen right now is a test fit of those photographs. So Photoshop Elements has fitted the photos together, and this is what it's come up with. It hasn't actually modified the photos yet. In fact, it never will modify the photos, but it's presenting this to us so that we can make adjustments. And right now it looks pretty good. If you look at the clouds through here, they're all continuous. There was a cloud that overlapped, and that looks full here now. There was an overlap on the cloud here. That looks good. So this panoramic mural looks okay to me. So now I'm going to click OK up here in the upper right hand corner, and Photoshop will now go about the job of actually making the photograph. Now you notice here over on the lower right, all four photographs still exist, each one as their own layer. And Photoshop Elements has made a mask for each one to allow only those parts to show through that will show in the final picture. And hold that thought while we go look at what it's done for us. Okay, so Photoshop Elements right now has created this picture. In stitching up and aligning the picture, you'll notice that the top and bottom edges do not align. That's because Photoshop has slid the pictures up and down, left and right, to get them to align with the information that's in the picture itself. So we have to cut out these jaggies at the top and the bottom. Now you don't really have to do that if in your final mural the top edge or the bottom edge or both will not be seen. You don't have to cut them out, but I'll show you how to do it. We go over here to the toolbar, we select the crop tool, and then we pull the crop tool like this to select only those parts of the picture that have picture content in them. And if I can get this aligned the way I'd like to. Okay, so it looks like, no, I have to make an adjustment up here at the top because it's up too high. Good. Now it looks like the only thing that's in the selection box is sky. And so I'm going to click OK to select the sky. And now we have a rectangle that has the sky backdrop and it fully stitched together. Now, just out of curiosity, you can come up here to the top where it says image, pull down the image, and go to resize, and when the menu flies out, select image size. It tells us right now that this image, it's a little over 46 inches wide and a little over 9.6 inches high, the resolution of 144 pixels per inch. And we need to keep that in mind because we're going to be using that information a little bit later. So I'm going to click cancel right now. Now, if you look on the lower right, this is sort of getting geeky here. You really don't need to know this, but I'm going to go through it anyway. The four pictures still exist, each picture in its own layer, and they're laid on top of one another with these masks so that the final merged picture shows through. Well, we can't do any further work on these with them all separate like that, so we have to do what graphic designers refer to as flatten the picture, smash it all down into one picture instead of these four layers laid on top of one another, and create just one continuous picture. There's a lot of ways you can flatten the image, but the easiest way for our purposes, we're just going to write it out as a JPEG. So you go to the File menu, open it, select Save As, click yes, and then we're going to label this panorama, and I don't like 1, let's put panorama 5. Okay, now so we've given it a name, and here we want to select JPEG as the format. Okay, in writing out a JPEG, it forces the software to collapse that picture into one flattened picture. So now we click save. It's going to ask us for the quality. I'm going to move the slider bar here all the way to the right to get a quality of 12, which is the maximum. That's going to produce a picture which is 4.5 megapixels. That's shown right here. 4.5 megapixels because the preview is selected. I'm going to select OK. So now that picture has been written out into my photo directory, under Windows, and I can go out there and grab it. But in the meantime, I'm going to close all of these pictures that are down here. So I'm going to select this panorama as well, right click and say close, because we don't need these pictures anymore. And I'm not going to save the panoramic photo because we've already saved a JPEG out on the hard drive. Now on to the adjustments, the further adjustments we're going to make to this panoramic photograph. Now I've opened up Photoshop Elements again, and we're going to bring in the JPEG that we just wrote out and do some more manipulation on it. So I have the My Pictures directory from Windows open. Here's the file we wrote out rather. I'm going to bring it in here, and now it shows up in Photoshop Elements. To do the subsequent editing, we're going to use the quick edit mode up here in the upper right. Photoshop Elements has much of the power of Photoshop, and to do a tutorial on all the tools and filters and effects that they have available is far beyond the scope of this video. So I'm going to show you how to use the quick edit features. And by the way, I use quick edit all the time. I don't know Photoshop. So we're going to use the quick edit features. And one of the features of quick edit right now is what they have over here called Smart Fix. This is a one-click Smart Fix which will analyze your photo and see if there are any shortcomings in the photograph that they can fix. So let's do that now. We're just going to click Smart Fix and let's see what it gives us. Okay. Notice it's darkened the horizon, so I'm sorry, the zenith, not the horizon, so that we have a very dark sky overhead, and we have a lighter sky down at the horizon, exactly what you would expect. Also now it's brought out some of the gray undersides of the clouds. Nice puffy clouds like these usually have gray undersides. That's in effect the shadow of the cloud itself. So this is pretty good, but I think we can do a little bit better. So we're going to go over here to the right panel where you have lighting functions. And lighting has light and shadows, dark and highlights, and mid-tone contrast. Well, I'm going to move the light and shadows a little slider a little bit to the right, which will lighten it up just a little to my liking. And I'm probably about, 3/5 of the way across the slider bar. Then I'm going to go down to mid-tone contrast and move that just a little bit to the right. And that's probably a little too much. And right here, that sort of highlighted some of the detail in the clouds. So this appeals to me, and your mileage may vary, by the way. You can adjust these three sliders to anything that you want, any look that you want to get out of your sky. But this is what pleases me right now. So I'm going to click the OK button over here, and that makes the changes permanent in the picture. So now we have a picture that's nice, but it's not quite done yet. If you remember, we can pull down Image, go to Resize and Image Size. The image size is 46 by a little over 9, almost 10. That's a good size, but it's not going to really produce a satisfying backdrop. So what I'm going to do right now is resize this picture. First thing I need to do for that is to make sure that the constrained proportions is checked. When constrained proportion is checked, you have this little chain image icon that comes up here. That means that these two proportions are locked. What that does for you means that you can change one dimension and the other dimension will adjust automatically without your having to calculate what it should be. So I'm going to make two adjustments right here. I'm going to make the width of this 72. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a 300 pixels per inch resolution. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it was 144 pixels, which is a little bit low. And most printers have a native resolution of either 300 or 600 pixels per inch. So if you know that your printer is 300 pixels per inch, you would put in 300 here, and if you know that your printer is 600 pixels per inch, of which a lot of the more modern ones are, you would put 600 in here. Once I've done that, I select OK. And Photoshop, I've got the hourglass figure. For a second there, Photoshop has made the adjustments and shown me now the picture at what it says down here is a 15% zoom, but it's still larger than the screen. So I'm going to double click the hand tool, which will bring the whole picture back onto the screen. So now we can pull down the image, go to resize, image size, and it says we have a 72 by 4, just under 15-inch picture at 300 pixels per inch. Okay, that's pretty good as far as width goes, but it's probably not good enough as far as height goes. So now, the nice thing about clouds are that clouds don't have any fixed dimensions. You can't say that that cloud's too large or too small. We're going to use that fact to our advantage right here and make this whole photo backdrop a little bit taller so that it will have a nice height for, say, an HO layout. Now to do that, I'm going to uncheck constrain proportions, because this time I'm going to stretch it in one direction only, and that's the height direction. So instead of 14, I'm going to type in 24 and then click OK. Now Photoshop has resized the whole picture, and its size now, if we pull down image, resize, image size, it's 72 by 24, which would, we're going to hit cancel there because we're not going to do anything more. This will make a nice sky backdrop for an HO style size layout. So what we have right now is probably close to our finished product. It doesn't take very long. Once you have all of your tools on your computer and you have the pictures to work with, you can turn out a photo backdrop in very, very short time. So we're going to save this. We're going to save it under another name, not Panorama 5. Let's call it 6, so that we always have 5 around in case we want to go back and redo something. We're going to save that. It's going to ask us for the quality again, and we have quality 12. This is going to create a fairly large file. As you can see, it's still calculating the file. So let's just hit OK and let it write out the file. I have my hourglass there. It's writing the JPEG format. It's going to take a few seconds because this is now a much, much larger file than the 4.5 megabytes that it was before. Actually, 4.5 megapixels would be more than 4 megabytes. So let's go to My Pictures and Panorama 6. Let's get properties for that. And it says that it is now a 50 megabyte file. So that's a pretty large file. And that's one of the reasons why you don't want an extremely high resolution camera to start with when you make these pictures. Because unless you have a very, very capable computer, as the size of the file grows, because remember what we've done, we've taken 4 pictures which were 0.6 of a megapixel each, stitched them together and got something that was 4.5 megapixels after Photoshop added in all sorts of information in the background. Then we took that picture and we increased the pixel density from 144 pixels an inch to 300 pixels an inch. By doubling the pixel density in each direction, we quadruple the size of the file it produces. And then we stretched the picture in 2 dimensions. We went from 46 to 72 and from 9.5 to 24 inches. So the resulting file is now this very, very large 50 megabyte file. And you may have plenty of disk space, and you may have plenty of, you can put this down on a CD to take it to wherever you're going to print it. But remember, the larger this file is, the longer it's going to take your computer to chew through the processing on this file. This happens to be a dual-core Pentium i5 laptop that I'm working on right now, so it's a fairly capable machine. Make the file as large as you want, but just remember, if your machine starts to choke on it, one of the things you can do is step back in the resolution of the source files to keep all that under control. What did we demonstrate in the example? Well, we demonstrated the use of textures that we got from an online source as source material for a photo backdrop. We then stitched those textures together, and we then began manipulating the image by cropping it. and we adjusted color, brightness, contrast till the picture was to our liking. Then we resized the picture first in one dimension while maintaining the proportions. Then we showed an example of stretching in a single dimension to make the picture conform to the size that we needed for our photo backdrop. So now the picture is ready to go to printing. But before we do that, we're going to launch off on the second example using different tools and a different method of resizing so that you can see how to do it in one of several other ways. I'm going to demonstrate how you can use the software that came with your camera to do the photo stitching function of making a photo backdrop. So I use Canon cameras, and they supply this photo stitch utility, which you can see in the middle of the screen right here. So we're going to start that photo stitch. And this brings up this screen where your first task is selection and arrangement of the images. You're given choices to open, arrange, switch, clear, and reduce and enlarge the picture. So right now we're going to click open and get the pictures. Now I've already pointed the software at 5 photos that I took of the South Branch Valley of the Potomac River. And when you use a Canon camera, they have a stitch mode, and when you engage stitch mode, all of the photos that you take are labeled STA, Stitch A, Stitch B, Stitch C, Stitch D, Stitch E, and so on in order until you exit stitch mode. And it helps the Canon camera and the Canon software identify pictures that should be stitched together. So I'm going to select Stitch A. Then I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select Stitch E so that A through E are selected. And now I'm going to click the Open button, and the software is opening the photos. Now here they are as they appear in the software. I'm going to make these a little bit larger by clicking Enlarge so that we can see them better. So now that we've opened the files, the next tab that's highlighted is Arrange. In Arrange mode, I can move these pictures left or right until they're in the order that I want them stitched in. Oops. That's probably not the order I want them stitched in. So since they were opened in the proper order, they were in the proper order. So right now we don't need to do anything more on this screen, although there's an option to switch, clear, rotate, and as we used, enlarge or reduce. So now that we're happy, we can go on to Merge. On the Merge tab, there's Start Merge, Merge Settings. Let's take a look at Merge Settings for a moment. The merge settings on this particular software I think is very nice. It allows you to adjust for whether the camera was panned to take the 5 shots, which is most likely going to be the case, or whether the camera was moved in parallel. That's not likely when you're taking landscape shots. So this should be set up for panning. They also allow you to set in the focal length equivalent of the lens that you're using, but that's probably a little bit sophisticated. So we'll click OK here. We've set it for pan. Now we need to click Start, and it will start the merge. And I'm working on my desktop machine here, which is a quad-core, very fast processor. So this is going to be nearly instantaneous, and don't expect to see that probably on the machine that you might be using. So here we go with Start, and as you can see, it almost instantaneously put the pictures together. Let's enlarge this a little bit more so that we can take a look at this. Alright, now just as in our first example, the tops and bottoms of the frames don't match up because the software has gone in and used the image content itself to match up the edges of the frames. And as a matter of fact, this software has an option to allow you to show the seams, and those are the seams between the various photographs. So we'll hide those again. So it looks good to me. I don't see any discontinuities in any of the major lines like the tree line here or the skyline of the mountain. So I think we're good. So we've done a good merge. So let's go on to the Save tab. I'm going to reduce this a little bit here to show you what the software has done. On the Save tab, the software has picked out the area of the screen that has just picture in it. Okay, so it's cutting out the jaggies for you. If you remember in the first example with Adobe Photoshop Elements, we had to do that crop ourselves. Okay, in the Canon software here, it allows you to do that crop. I'm sorry, it does that crop for you. So since we believe we have a good crop here, I'm just going to click Save. That's asking me what to call it, so I'm going to call it, well, we call the other one Panorama 5 or 6. Let's call this Panorama 10. And we'll save that file. It's now actually creating, if you look up here, it's now actually creating the merged picture. And it's now saving the file and asking us whether we want to view the saved image. I'm going to click Yes. And it brings up the saved image for us to view. And as we can see, it's pretty good. So that's how you can use software that potentially came with your camera to do the photo merge. Now we'll take our merged photograph and we're going to go on and do some more adjustments on it, just like we did in the first example. On my desktop now I have the program GIMP open. That's G-I-M-P. GIMP is an image manipulation program, much like Adobe Photoshop, the full-size version. And it's very powerful, has lots of features and lots of controls that you can use to manipulate images. But GIMP has one advantage over Adobe Photoshop, in that GIMP is free. It's open source software, it's built and maintained by volunteers, and it's free to for anyone to use. And I will include a link to the GIMP website somewhere in this video. So we're going to use GIMP to edit the panorama we just created. So I'm going to load it into here by dragging it into GIMP, and here's what it looks like. In GIMP you can zoom in and out, as you would expect. Zoom in either from the menus or by using the plus key will allow you to zoom in, or to zoom out just use the minus key and it will allow you to zoom out. The image has a scale image, which we're going to use later, which will give you your image size in inches or pixels, and I have it set up for inches right here. We're going to use that later, so I'm just taking you through the menus. Under colors you're going to find most of your useful tools. Now GIMP doesn't have the one-click photo fix like we saw in Adobe. However, it's not without some automatic features. If you go into the color menu, scroll down to auto, the flyout menu shows that you have auto equalize, auto white balance, auto color enhance, auto normalize, stretch contrast, and stretch the histogram. Let's try the color enhance. That usually produces some good results. Not as good as the one-step fix in Adobe, which gets it about 85% right most of the time. Now you can see what this did. We have a nice sky with some lightness now near the top of the mountain, progressively getting darker as you move up into the sky. The field in the foreground is now a little bit more like a golden rather than a tan straw brown. That's probably a little bit too warm from what I remember when I took the picture. And you've got some of the early fall colors in the trees, which of course, if this was sort of early fall, I think it was October, which isn't really deep fall down here in Virginia. So this isn't a bad color scheme, and we'll leave it like this for the moment. Also under colors, you can adjust brightness and contrast, and let's see, if we adjust brightness up quite a bit, what you'll see is it throws everything, a haze over everything, and sort of pushes the photograph into the background. If you wanted the photograph to look further away than it actually is, you might use brightness and contrast. Raising the contrast a little bit makes it such that it's a very, very sunny day with deep shadows. Let's leave a little of that contrast in there, not all of it, but just a little bit more. That sort of pleases me right now. So we're going to click OK on that. The other things you can do under the filters menu, this is something you ought to know about. Under the filters menu, if you go to enhance, the flyout menu has anti-alias, de-interlace, despeckle, and down here it has something called unsharp mask. It's the last option there. Now believe it or not, Unsharp mask is actually used for sharpening up your picture. And right now I have some settings in here that we're going to apply. And first, however, let's zoom in on our picture and see what it looks like. I think I have to close this before I can zoom in. Let's zoom in on our picture and see what it looks like before we apply the unsharp mask. Now let's apply the unsharp mask. So we go to Filters, Enhance, Unsharp Mask. And I admit these are probably a little bit strong settings, but let's look at what happens when we click OK. You can see the task is running at the bottom of the screen. And there's the effect. As I said, I had some rather stiff settings set into that unsharp mask. Sharpening works by finding edges in the picture and enhancing them. So you can see that the trunks of trees here and here have been enhanced by the unsharp mask, as have some of the leaves. But I think this is a little bit too strong. So let's undo the unsharp mask and go back to where we were. And there's another reason why you probably don't want a very, very sharp, clear picture. As we put this up as a backdrop, we want the picture to be a little bit soft and a little bit blurry so that it doesn't detract from the trains and the structures and the great scenery that you're going to build into the foreground. So printing and a large format printer at only 300 dots per inch will help do that. But the other thing is, we don't want a very, very sharp picture when we make a photo backdrop. So now I'm going to enlarge the picture again, and let's see how we can attack some defects. Right at the top of the mountain, right here, you can see that there's a little discontinuity in the way the picture was stitched together. Now the way we're going to fix that, we're going to go here to our toolbox and get this tool that looks like a rubber stamp. That's the clone stamp tool. What the clone stamp tool will do is, when you hold down the control key and click your left mouse button, that picks a spot, as you can see at that crosshair, and it loads that color into the clone stamp tool. And then where you subsequently hit the picture with the clone stamp, it will put that color into the spot where you're clicking, and we can get rid of that small discontinuity and make it go away. Not that that discontinuity would have been very noticeable, but we can edit out anything that we want. As a matter of fact, if we want to edit out some feature in the foreground here, especially with these eastern wooded hills, we could pick an area of the hills that we want to use as our source material, and then just clone stamp over something in the foreground and effectively camouflage it and make it go away. And I've done that on a number of photographs. So now we have a photograph that we're probably pretty happy with. Color may be a little bit extreme, but maybe to your liking. So let's see what we can do, as we did on the other photograph, to scale this up. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the scale tool. Now the scale tool is available here on the taskbar, and it's the one right here, fourth row down, the one on the extreme right. It's also available under the image menu, scale image. So that's where we're going to go, scale image. Now here, remember we had constrained proportions on Photoshop Elements. Here we have the little chain icon, and we have nothing that says constrained proportions. To constrain or unconstrained proportions, you have to click the little chain icon to either make or break the chain, and that will constrain the proportions for you. So right now it's showing the resolution in pixels per inch and the height and width in pixels. I don't want to see the height and width in pixels, so what we're going to do is we're going to set that for inches from the pull down menu, and it's telling us right now that our image is 55 inches wide and just under 10 inches tall at 200 pixels per inch. Well, just like in our last example, we want to set this 300 pixels per inch. So we have the chain connected so that these two resolutions, X resolution and Y resolution, will be set together. So I'm going to enter 300 into 1, click enter, and now what it says is that if we do this print this at 300 dots per inch, our picture is only 37 by 6.5 roughly. So I'm going to hit scale, and that will lock in that scale. I'm going to zoom out. Under the zoom option here, there's an option to fit the picture in the window, which I'm going to click. Zoom, fit image in window. Thank you. Picked the wrong one there. So now we have our whole image back in the window again, and it's at 300 dots per inch. It's a little over 37 inches wide. What do we want to do if we want to take this up to 72 inches like we did in the last one? Well, I'm going to show you a technique which is a little bit more sophisticated than the single, zoom from whatever it is to wherever you want it in one step, as we did in the last example. So we're going to go back to the image menu, to scale image, and reset this again for inches. So we're 37 inches wide. We want to go to 72. I'm going to make sure that my proportions are constrained, so both chain icons are linked. And now what we're going to do is we're going to expand this picture in a series of steps, each step being about 10%, so that the algorithm which the software uses to expand the image creates an image which is not quite as blocky or as blurred as it would if it created the rescaled image all in one step. Now, you can select from a number of different scaling algorithms here. They have cubic, linear, or sync. And I've looked into all of the details of them, and I can't make heads or tails out of which is better than the others. But what we're going to do is, if we're 37 inches wide right now, let's take 10% of that, which is about 4 inches. So let's make this 41 inches, and then enter. So now we would go to 41 inches by 7.2 inches high, and we hit scale. And it's giving us a warning that we're going to create an image of 241.6 megabytes. And this is what I was talking about in the previous example. You have to be a little bit careful, but I'm going to go there anyway. And it's now calculating that size and resizing the picture. And here it is. We're going to go back to view and zoom and back to fit image in window. Now when we pull down the image menu and scale image, it tells us we have, let's convert this back to inches, 41 by 7.2. So now if we take a 10% increase on that, which would be about 4.1 more inches in width, let's make it a 50 even. 45 even, and we hit scale, and away it goes. It's now rescaling the picture. And the picture now is larger, and we're going to zoom, fit image in window again. When we come down here and we open up print size, and it tells us we have a 45 by 7.9. So if you wanted good quality, and for a backdrop with trees and leaves and the like, you probably want a little bit better quality than we were willing to accept in the sky, where the sky is just a solid color and some wispy clouds which don't have a really defined form. Going there in one step from wherever we were to wherever we wanted to go was probably acceptable. Not so with trees and countryside. We want to keep the detail from getting blocky. So let's cut to the chase and see what happens, what this looks like if I go all the way to 72 inches wide all in one step. I've gone back to scale image now, and I've scaled the image to 72 inches wide, which results in an image which is just under 13 inches tall. I did this off camera because the computer took a while to chew on that image because it's now quite large, and no sense of your being bored on screen. So we now have a 72-inch wide photo backdrop just like we did the last time. Can we stretch this now in the vertical direction alone and make it taller? The answer is yes and no. Yes, you can get away with a little bit, but if you go too far, it's going to start to look like the Rocky Mountains. Also, if you scale too much, these foreground trees are going to start to tower over your model in this particular composition. If those foreground trees weren't there, you'd probably get away with a little more. So let's show how to do that. We're going to uncheck the constraints on the width and the height so that I can adjust one independently, and we're going to type in 15 onto the height and hit scale. And so now the computer's thinking about it, as you can see from the bar on the bottom of the screen. I hope you can see the bar on the bottom of the screen. It may be behind the taskbar. Still thinking. And there we have it. It's scaled it up a little bit. So let's go back to View, Zoom, Fit Image in Window. And of course it's still fitting in the window because we haven't widened it. Now that's probably as far as it's reasonable to go. The foreground trees are probably now as tall as you want to push them. Let's see what it would look like, however, if we scaled it up to 20 inches in height. So we go back to Image, Scale Image. And we're going to put 20 inches in the height here. And uncheck Constrain Proportions and hit Scale. The computer's thinking about it. It's going to take it a few seconds before it comes up with the answer for us. Okay, there we are. Let's shrink that so it's all inside the screen. And I think that's a little much. That's probably starting to look a little bit like the Rocky Mountains and not like typical modest eastern mountains. So let's go Edit, undo the last scale. That will take us back to 15 inches high, which is probably as far as we can take this. Now there are all sorts of other things you can do with a powerful program like this, and you probably could do them in Photoshop Elements as well. You can take all this colorful fall foliage out by sampling one of those colors and changing it to another one. You can change this picture all to a nice bright screaming woodland scenics green to match your foreground colors if you so desire by using the color balance tool here. However, I find that the browns and the variation in color that's found in nature, that's found in a photo backdrop, is actually a big improvement over what you get when you use woodland scenics to scenic your layout. So I actually like a little bit of color in the scenery. So we've shown how to stitch together with the tools that came with your camera, then adjust the picture in GIMP instead of Photoshop Elements. And these two combinations are not the only way you can do this. There are many photo editing tools, many tools you can use to stitch the photographs together. And so I've shown you two ways. One way using a commercial product, another way using an open source product, and now we're going to go on to other things.